set that revolves around gigantic beasts and kaiju, you would be forgiven for thinking that the human tribes of Ikoria are of little consequence. But even a passing glance shows that for what they lack in size compared to their monstrous neighbours, the occupants of Ikoria's settlements have a rich and nuanced design that makes them some of Magic's biggest characters. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast. We talk about all things Magic flavour, design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And we're here today to talk about the Humans of Ikoria. Last week we did Monsters of Ikoria as part of our lore episodes, and this set is pretty much all about the monsters, but I think it's become quite clear in the past few episodes that I am actually pretty obsessed with the human tribes that are going through Ikoria right now. And so I said to Nathan, we're going to be doing a humans episode. And now we're doing a humans episode. So that's how that went down.
I like how you make up stories that make you come across as a douchebag that haven't actually happened.
I mean, half makeup. I think what I do is I make up stories in my mind about how conversations go, and they're far more interesting than the conversations which are, I want to do a humans episode. Oh, do you think that's worth it? Yeah, I do. Oh, okay, then we'll do a humans episode. And then that's how we go. So, yeah. We don't have to talk about magic. We can talk about something else.
I mean, it suddenly makes a lot more sense of how our conversations go. It doesn't feel like you're listening because you are just listening to a different conversation.
It's how I feel
the
conversation goes in my fantasy brain space.
Well, I'm glad that this podcast relies a lot on your fantasy brain space.
Yeah. What have you been watching on Netflix? Let's just talk about that. Let's not talk about magic.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about Tiger King. Let's go, right?
No, I tell you what I've been watching.
Because he's kind of like bonded with his cats, so it is actually topical.
He's 100% not. If you've watched that documentary, have you watched that?
No, I know. I know.
You and I have watched a very different thing. I've been watching The Midnight Gospel, the new Pendleton Ward show. The guy who did Adventure Time. It's his new TV show.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
How is it?
It takes up a lot of brain space to watch because it's incredibly like navel-gazing and psychedelic, and it's not like twee. It's not like a kids show. It's pretty full on.
Is it, and it's on Netflix, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Shameless plug for the episode. Cool. I'm going to go and watch that then. What did you say it was called?
It's called The Midnight Gospel.
The Midnight Gospel. All right.
Yeah.
I'm putting that in now. Cool. Fantastic. Thank you. Right, good. Anyway, so what are we doing today?
We're talking about the Humans of Ikoria. The Humans of Ikoria. The humans are the only sentient race on Ikoria other than the monsters. I think last week I kept saying the monsters weren't sentient, and I don't think I know what sentient means. Obviously, the monsters are sentient because they do have a brain and they do think, but the humans are the only evolved,
Yeah.
Thinky brain
like
people.
It's
The thinky brain people. Like there's no other like Tolkien, there's no elves, there's no whatever else. Which was kind of a bold choice because I mean the way that races kind of work in a lot of the different planes of Magic, they kind of all have their sort of place no matter what plane they're on, unless they really subvert things, So for the most part, the goblins are the kind of grunts and the idiots of the plane. For the most part, the humans are the kind of broad speaking, slightly rugged, but still quite intelligent race. Broadly speaking, the elves are the sort of in tune with nature race, or they kind of fall into the kind of aloof, stargazy sort of people. And they could have very easily done this with this plane. I can imagine if they brought elves to Ikoria, the elves would have been essentially what the Bonders are. But I really like the thing that they only had humans. Like it brings a really nice flavour to the plane. But there are these opposing forces.
Yeah, what I like is that if you look at there's a gremlin card in the set, and it kind of looks like what the goblins ended up devolving into. Because you can kind of imagine if this is the kind of place where you have to be up against monsters all the time. You need to be a contingent. You need to be able to clearly be like a force that can amass an army. So things like elves might have got hunted out for by being too sparse. The things like goblins might have been too unorganized, that kind of thing. So it might be that humans were the only race that could technically like have the proper mix of being barbaric enough, but also being like able to work together and having that community for that perfect mix as a species to actually fight back.
Like humans are always kind of painted in fantasy IPs at being the most resilient of all the races. Like we're never the smartest, we're never the most strong or the fastest or the best at something, like in terms of technology. But in lots of different fantasy IPs, the reason that humans proliferate is because they have like the strength of heart and the strength of community to keep pushing forward.
Yeah, we are ants.
Yeah,
ants basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the really interesting things, the reason I'm so obsessed with these human tribes of Ikoria is because usually in any Magic set and really any story that you're telling, because that's what really magic sets are, is, in terms of the flavor, it's a story pinned onto the mechanical nature of the cards to try and make it more interesting. And usually when you're telling a story, you have a protagonist faction or individual and an antagonist faction or individual. And the best sort of stories that are told kind of mix up those tropes. That's where you get like anti-heroes, or you get self-righteous heroes, or like villains with a cause kind of a thing. And those are always the best
betrayals, backstabs.
Absolutely.
All this nonsense, It creates layers to people's motives. And
that and so usually that happens when you have two different factions or several factions that all have the sort of agency to be able to express those motives. But when you have a set like Ikoria, where it's just the humans versus the monsters, I can imagine the first sort of pitch of that story wasn't very interesting, because really it's just, there's monsters, let's protect ourselves. Or it was, we're the evil humans that are hunting the noble monsters to extinction. And really, it's much more interesting than that, because the humans are kind of cut down into these different tribes, and because the monsters aren't necessarily noble or they're not evil, because the human tribes of the plane don't seem to have, outwardly evil, like intrinsic nature, and they also are not heroic either. Like all these different sort of tribes of characters, be they monster or human, are quite interesting. And I just wanted to give lip service to the design team and what they did with the human tribes, because like when the cards came out, I really resonated with the choices they made, with color pie reasons, with aesthetic design, the whole thing. So that's what we're doing here today.
It's quite nice, because when we were talking about theories of how the story was going to go, because when we were talking about it, we had no idea if there was going to be any humans in the set whatsoever. We kind of contemplated the fact that it might be humans in recession, or they might be the minor to the monsters major, and I'm really glad that they actually did that. What I think resonates with a lot of people is that almost post-apocalyptic kind of feel. People like Fallout, people like Borderlands, that kind of style. They like things like Mortal Engines, where it kind of feels like, as I say, like humans are at the brink of survival, and this feels like that. Obviously, the point of view we felt from the Sundered Bond is that we see it from the human side of survival. And the set obviously paints more of a complicated relationship between the two, which I think is quite nice, because we've hit the plane almost at a point of where it's starting to just understand its own mechanics, and the way that the monsters and the humans can socialize together. So it's kind of almost developing relationship as we see it. So it's quite nice for that. But it does give us like two very different sides of the humans' way of dealing with the monster threat, as you can call them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be talking about the individual factions. Some of them we know a lot about, some of them we don't know so much about. It's interesting that you mentioned the Mortal Engines franchise, because I mean, I've made the joke in the past that I really hate it when we compare Magic to other IPs. Obviously, that's me being stupid, because
I'm never going to stop, so you're going to have to get used to
it. No, I think it's right. Like you mentioned Mortal Engines, and I'm also going to mention quite a bit through this, because of the monsters seem to have this kind of Toho kaiju kind of feel. The humans also follow suit. But what's really interesting about, if you've read a lot of manga or if you watch a lot of anime, is that a lot of the time the sort of aesthetic for humans in those shows, a lot of the popular ones, are actually the sort of Japanese manga depiction of Europe and sort of Germanic areas of the world. Like, not everything, it just looks like sort of, Edo Japan. A lot of it looks like turn of the century Germany, or turn of the century France or Britain or whatever. And that's where a lot of the sort of steampunk aesthetic comes into a lot of Japanese media as well. And you can see those influences in Ikoria a lot. So I'm going to mention a lot about things like Full Metal Alchemist, Attack on Titan, these sort of very big manga anime series, and also things like Mortal Engines. It's all that kind of just about approaching technology, turn of the century. I think if guns and cars and vehicles were more of a part of Magic outside of the niche planes like Kaladesh and Ixalan, where you have things like muskets or harpoons or whatever, I think this society would have things like muskets and cannons. They've decided to not do that, because I think they want to be very careful about how they treat technology in the game. But yeah, it has that sort of feel to it. It has that sort of 1890s to kind of 1913, just about World War One sort of feel, but through that kind of stylized anime lens. Which, feedback loop, when those shows come to the West, and then we start making media that is a pastiche on that, and it kind of goes backwards and forwards, and you get this kind of, really stylized idea of those times. So yeah, we're just going to bit into it. There are three main cities of humans, and then there are two other factions that we're going to talk about as well. So the first the city of humans that we know the most about, we'll probably spend quite a bit of time this episode talking about, is Dranith. Dranith is found in the Savai region of Ikoria, and it's where we spend most of our time during the story of Ikoria, whether it's in the Sundered Bond or whether it's in the cards, and it's where we meet most of the human characters, especially a lot of the named characters as well. So Dranith is a big city. It's a walled city which has a bunch of concentric rings that kind of make up the different walls of the city. So the outer walls are meant to help protect like the third and fourth rings of the area, and then so on and so forth, with the farmlands and some of the more rural residential areas on the outskirts of the rings. And then the further in you get the sort of central hub of the city itself. This is also something which, again, something like Attack on Titan used to depict in their sort of world as well. So this idea of having fortified walls in concentric rings is kind of a known trope. The city of Dranith is a heavily militaristic society. So it's not really formed around a religion, a central church, and it's not really formed around sort of like a central monarchy. It's a very militaristic focused society, and is because of that is also slightly sort of fascistic and authoritarian, which is where we get into one of the first real big sort of thematic twists of how they depict the humans of Dranith, because it's from the outward looking in. It's a lot of what we actually don't like about our sort of Western societies. You know, we don't really like it when the military takes over. If you watch any sort of like film, it's, you know, shit hits the fan when the military kind of come in and start running the show. That's usually when you know things have turned, right?
Yeah, I think the thing about Dranith is it doesn't doesn't look to have any kind of like Senate or Parliament or anything like that. It tends to run in as much as it doesn't have like a monarchy, like an heir, like passing down through a family generation. I imagine because a lot of people die a lot of the time in Ikoria, so you can't maintain lineage. But it does look like it runs a militaristic leader, because they're the one who's going to lead you to survival, and essentially you are, as a society, kind of essentially pawns to be used in the fight of survival.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which you see that a lot in Dranith.
Yeah, absolutely. And this military leader that is leading them through is a man named General Kudro. The military state of Dranith, most of the people that are with the military wear uniform pretty much all the time, and the uniform is adorned with green crystals. So we mentioned last week about how Ikoria is scattered with crystals that makes up all the kind of geography of the plane, and humans use the crystals as well as warning systems. So when monsters get near, the crystals spark to life, they kind of glow, and that gives them sort of like a warning signal that they need to sort of, you know, battle up. And this makes up most of the uniforms, makes up a lot of the buildings. The city of Dranith is actually built around a central pillar of crystal called the Argolith. Now, we mentioned the Ozolith last week, which is a big crystal structure made up of millions of other crystals. This is the Argolith, which is the largest single crystal which you can find on the plane of Ikoria, and it's a big green crystal. So this is kind of what they sort of focus on as their warning system. What we do notice about the sort of military nature of Dranith is that they don't seem to have like a class system per se. What it seems to be is that the military section of Dranith, if you're in the military, you are sort of treated like you are higher class, but you're not necessarily treated any better because of it. It's just more the idea that the people of Dranith venerate their military. So we see in the story, The Sundered Bond, that Luca, even though he's sort of a hero of the Dranith military and he's part of a special unit, he still lives in relatively modest accommodation. It's not like he has a lavish penthouse apartment. Even Jarina Kudro, that's General Kudro's daughter, she lives in a slightly bigger sort of set of digs because she is, you know, part of the military leading family, but she's not in like some big palatial palace. So even if you are part of the military and you are considered to be doing your part for Dranith in this kind of nationalistic sort of service way, you're still not necessarily sort of living in the riches of the world. That being said, in the book The Sundered Bond, we do see that when Luca needs to escape the city because he's about to be punished by Kudro for his bond with the cat, which he gets throughout the story, he escapes through the slums of Dranith, which is a small section behind the main military HQ that seems to house a lot of the serving staff that specifically serve the military elite, and that these are essentially slums. So whilst there's not a sort of class of wealth being pushed around, there definitely does seem to be like a class of status, which I think is kind of interesting. we don't delve too much of that into the book. I think that's the only time that we see that sort of system. But yeah, it is there.
There's no excess really in Draenith at all. Like
no.
you don't see people living very lavishly. There might be the poorest, but there doesn't seem to be much of, like, say, the richest. There doesn't seem to see like nobility or anything like that. I imagine it. The good thing about this is this society seems to have trimmed all of the bells and whistles that you can afford when you have, time to enjoy life.
Yeah, absolutely, because everything is focused and pushed on the idea of the defense of the city. So the main colors of Draenith are Mardu colors, because that is what the colors are of the Savai region. But specifically, it seems to be black and white are the most prominent. This is on the cardboard as well as kind of philosophically. And like when we see Orzhov colors in human tribes in other planes like Ravnica with the Orzhov, or if we go to Ixalan with the Legion of Dusk.
Vampires.
The Vampire Legion. Their black-white sort of color identity is kind of a blending, usually of like religious authority in the white, the kind of religious self-righteousness, but with the kind of self-defeating, almost oppressive nature of black. So it's like using religion for self-serving means for their own society. So it's a very sort of skewed negative idea of what you can do with a society that is trying to, bring everyone under its rule with the white, but is also self-serving with the black. And that's not how, at least this is not how I've perceived the Humans of Draenith to be. They're still talking about a large society, and they're still maybe narrow in their worldview and self-serving to the larger society, but it's not in the same way. I tweeted out about this not too long ago, and I'm going to try and find the tweet that I sent out, because actually I think I voiced it pretty well. So the tribe of Draenith are not presented as being pure evil or underhanded, but rather blinded with conviction. The self-righteous white and the self-centered black is referring to the self, which is their society. They're proud and yet narrow in their outlook, with their place to the larger world. So the self-serving black isn't about the individual, which is something that we don't see often with black. And in fact, there are other black factions in terms of the hunters of Ikoria, which we'll get onto, which they are self-serving to individuals. But the Humans of Draenith, the military are all about protecting their society, but they're not afraid to sacrifice soldiers in the effort to do so. So you have the white and the black there, like pretty starkly contrasted, but still working together. I don't know. Am I reading too much into that? I think that's pretty good.
I think Hydro has a very, I'm going to say black and white way of thinking about things, because that's really apt for the fact that he's black and white. But you can see it in one of the cards as well, Heartless Acts, where he states it's them or us. This way of thinking of where it's a constant battle for survival, and everyone's not it's not expendable, but you need to, like, your military army is a resource that is going to be needed. And if he feels, and it does very much feel like his outlook is that they're fighting a losing battle. Usually, especially in things like, in any other fantasy IP, you'll see that they'll fight to the last man to stand for their cause. And that is, yes, a very noble way to think about things, but it does have a certain black aspect to it as well, of self-preservation ahead of anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a very black way of thinking about it, because he doesn't stop to think about whether or not he should reconsider his point of view. I mean, obviously, the way we see the monsters throughout the story, you do see an empathetic side to them, and he doesn't even consider it. And that as you say, that narrow-mindedness, that inability to think outside of one's selfishness, that's essentially what the black side of it is. Because they could find compassion, there could be a way to find a middle ground, but he's unable to see outside of his own perspective.
So General Kudro's card, his actual physical card when he's represented in the game, he's got 3 abilities. The middle one doesn't matter too much, but the top one is other humans you control get +1/+1. So it's that white anthem effect, that big society feel, right? And then his last ability is pay 2, sacrifice 2 humans, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, which is a very black ability, which is the idea that you're sacrificing your resources and you're kind of cutting your own nose off to spite your face. And we've spoken about this in our Color Pie episodes about these kind of concepts quite clearly. And if I was to pick a magic card that showed the colors black, white for what they are, like just as in like a microcosm, I would usually have said one of the Orzhov cards from Ravnica. But I think this card, General Kudro of Draenith from the Ikoria main set, if a new player was to come to me and say, oh, what's an Orzhov card like? I might slam this down. Like, I think it's a really neat encapsulation about what black and white does. And it's funny that you talk about how like the military treats their soldiers like they're not dispendable, but they are needed. They are a resource, because you see that on the flavor throughout the cards as well. So there's a card, enchantment, it's 2 and a black for an enchantment, and it's called Bastion of Remembrance. And it's when Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and then whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is just like a blood artist effect, which we've seen in black quite a lot, and this is a black card. But it just goes to show that this, within the context of a black-white tribe, even the name of the card, Bastion of Remembrance, and the artwork shows a lot of flags with the faces of the fallen on them. This is a society that doesn't want the soldiers to die, but the soldiers are happy to die, and the military understands they will die in defense of the larger cause. Which, I mean, it's just so nuanced. Like, it's so good.
But it also kind of then underlies this idea of, because they're so constantly stuck with remembering of those that have died, they're constantly thinking. It's almost like vengeance. It almost feels like at that point of where, like it kind of also works with Luke within the story of where he's almost blinded by what the monster did to his contingent, because spoilers, they die, that he can't get over the fact that it might not have been the monster's intention. So it's funny, and it would normally, you'd look at this card and think, okay, it's a white effect. Like, the idea of it is quite white. But then the reason it's black is because you're bitter. Every time one of your creature dies, like you're poking, like it's almost like you're making your opponents pay for every life that they take from you. It's vengeance. It's not survival at that point. And that's kind of essentially what blinds a lot of the black white humans that we see from Drannith compared to what we see from the rest of the set. The rest of the set paints humans a little more open-minded, a little less indoctrinated. Should you say.
and that's it, isn't it? It's the indoctrination. But I just think it's a really nice sort of line to toe. Where, and this is going to get quoted completely out of context. I'm going to expect a soundbite to pop up, but this set made me really sympathise with a vaguely fascistic, vaguely nationalistic, narrow-minded society, because these humans are not outwardly evil. They do have a righteous cause that every other human can relate to. It's the protection of your family. It's the protection of your society. It's just the way that they do it is so, iron-fisted that they obviously end up pretty much being the antagonists of the Ikorian set, despite the fact that to an individual, actually no one in that society is overtly evil. Even General Kudro himself, I would say, is evil, just blinded by arrogance. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I was going to say, you can kind of almost like you can empathize with, and you can see their point of view. And one thing that people shouldn't forget is that this is basically how every single society on Earth was formed, was through this idea of having to be selfish to your own tribe, to your own society. Like, okay, yeah, we've managed to settle everything down ish to a point of where everyone can kind of live in general peace. But I mean, this is kind of essentially how every society was formed, where this iron-fisted approach of where you couldn't really afford not to be ruthless, otherwise you would die. And some people were unfortunate. The whole society's crumbled, and whereas others did quite well. And it was off the back of these kinds of ways of thinking. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about.
Absolutely. Just a few more things to mention about Drannith, and then we'll need to move on. There's a line in the book which is a General Kudro line. I think he's one of my new faves. I'm obsessed with this guy. He's great. And it's a line that he says to his daughter, Drina Kudro. Drina Kudro does have her own card in the set as well. She's actually a commander. She's the face commander for the Mardu deck. So she does have red in her colour pie. And the red,
she's a bit more reckless.
She's a bit more reckless. She's impulsive, and she's not...
It's perfect. It's a perfect example of adding a mood almost to or a way of... what's the word? Not ideology, but the way that her impulsiveness.
It's like it's a splash of color though, which I like as well. She is definitely an Orzhov card because she still has this sort of aristocrat's feel to her. But the splash of red shows that of her color, she's impulsive. She's not afraid to rebel slightly against her father, which you do see in the book. But
she's more in touch with her emotions.
She is, but her ideology is still always towards Drannith. No matter what she does in the book, you can never argue that she's against Drannith and her own kind. So yeah, that's a really nice little flavor thing. So this line in the book is General Kudro talking to Jirina, and he says, "I am not a king, and it is not entirely seemly that my position should pass on within my family." So even this man who has absolute power over his society, he has absolute control, he is an authoritarian, he is still not willing to say that he is divinely better than anyone else. It is still the whole society that is with him. And the context of this line is that he's saying that he thinks that Drina is one of the people that should take over from him as the leader of the nation. But it wouldn't necessarily be the way that they should do it. And she needs to prove herself in her own right, and not just because she's his daughter, which, you know, is just you would never attribute that line to someone who's just overtly power hungry or evil. He understands he doesn't have control.
Yeah, there's a lot of,
you know, there's a lot going on there.
There's a lot of points of notes that he's got hard over the years, but there are times before where he, you know, there are degrees of softness to him, and at no point can you can always understand his perspective, and it's always perspective that's actually quite fair. I don't think at any point you're out and outright think, you bastard. Apart from when he cuts the cat's head off. But,
sure.
you know,
I mean,
even then he makes excuses and he justifies it, saying that now these people have an expectation.
Yeah.
And obviously from their point of view, they don't understand that all monsters are bad. So, you know, it's almost like he's having to do his duty. At no point is he doing it out of selfishness. He's doing it out of righteousness.
He still is a bit of a bastard.
Good old Kidrone.
After having said all of that, he is a bit of a bastard.
He is still a bit of a bastard, and he deserves to have died on a sword. But, you know, it's still... You know, right.
By the way, if we didn't say at the top of the episode, or we said it, but we did say it last week, there are spoilers in this episode. So
if you,
good luck with that.
If you've got this, and you're just, I'm just saying, you've made mistakes because we've talked about the book a few times already today. So.
We have, Last 2 points on Draneth, then we'll move on. Firstly, it's just worth noting that we said earlier on that they don't revolve around religion. There does still seem to be some religion on Ikoria, at least within Draneth, because a lot of the characters reference gods and hells. So, like saying, if they don't just say, "Oh my god," they say, "Oh my gods," and "What in the hells?" I think we spoke about this before. It could be a religion that's still ongoing on Draneth, or it could be just a phrase that they use because of an old tradition. But there is still something.
Yeah, I think any society of this kind of period of time, if we are going to use that quote, they're going to still have an idea of where do you go after you die. Clearly they have. We don't know an idea of an afterlife, so they'll still have ideas and theories and everything like that. So
sure. And this last little thing is, visually speaking, Draneth has green crystals as part of their motif. When we talk about the other two cities in just a second, they have different colours which kind of make up their uniforms. It's not universal. Some of them have multiple, or just they kind of the artists just use whatever the colour they want. But mostly speaking, the Draneth army and the Draneth society uses green crystals. So that's Draneth. I could do a whole episode on Draneth, but we've got other things to talk about. The next city that we're going to be talking about is Skysail. Skysail is not in any one region because it is a floating structure. So it's a city that's completely made up of skyships and sky structures that use sort of balloon technology or blimp technology. There seems to be this thing on Ikoria called lift gas. We don't know what lift gas is. I'm going to headcanon that it's monster farts.
Wow. Yeah, with monster farts.
Monster farts.
So there are people that are going around bagging monsters' farts behind them. So not that's amazing. Okay. Right.
Yeah, not natural gas from the ground.
Of hilarious headcanon. Yeah, that's fine. That works.
I'm going to say it's monster farts because that's the level of humour we have on this show.
I'm not going to go for the fact that they've got volcanoes and they could probably be catching gas. No, monster farts. Yeah,
monster farts. Specifically brushwag farts. Skysail used to be a region called Orn in Indartha. We've mentioned this before. The city of Orn was breached by the Nightmares who live in Indartha an unspecified time ago, and the remnants of that city formed the first skyships that then float off in the sky, and now that's what we have. It's not one set structure. Ships come and go as they please, and because of this kind of nomadic, almost like free trade feel of Skysail, we get a lot of different style of people that live there. Whereas Draneth, you can definitely see there's one kind of society that lives there. In Skysail, there seems to be many people. It's got this kind of very merchant-heavy, sort of slightly piratey, like rebel, renegade-y kind of feel. And a lot of the characters that we meet in the very short time we spend in Skysail in the book are kind of, there's like secondhand bookshops and there's, spice merchants. And one of the characters that Jarena meets when she goes to Skysail is this kind of very exuberant, almost like pirate captain. He wouldn't look out of place on Ikoria. On Ixalan. I keep getting those mixed up. This does very much feel like what Ixalan could turn into in the future. Do you know what I mean? With like the dinosaurs and kind of style.
I think Ikoria they could have been like they could have been on the same plane. You could have flexed into it somehow. It wouldn't have felt it wouldn't have felt out of place.
Wouldn't felt too far out of place, and this is like especially that. There is no hard military in Skysail in the same way. It's not like Skysail isn't a militaristic society the same way that Dranath is, but there is a sort of standing army, if you like, and they're called defenders. So on a lot of the flavor text, we don't get to see this in the book at all, and there's very little on it in any of the other sort of Planeswalkers guides or Gamepedia or whatever. But if you look at a lot of the flavor text on the cards associated with Skysail, they say, they have a quote, and then it's the quote, blah, 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 this person, Skysail Defender. So immediately there in that little word, you can see the play design team, or the world building team rather, sort of differentiating even the feel of the army, which they have in Skysail versus Dranath. These people aren't antagonistic. They're there to protect the people and the structures of Skysail, in a much more sort of, I don't want to say passive way, because that seems almost counterintuitive to them being an army at all. But do you know what I mean? They're nice.
If you can have lots of like hunters and like bounty hunters and people like that, or like but you've got bars. If there's specifically saying in the book, there's loads of bars and pubs and places like that you can go to. So clearly there's going to be a bit of drama. So you might need a bit of bodyguarding to make sure it doesn't get out of control.
Mm-hmm. The uniform,
especially when you've got lots of plunder and treasure around as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
mostly they seem to be defending from the sort of flying monsters of Ikoria, because by virtue of them being up in the sky, they sort of fight with a lot of like bird dinosaurs and leviathans. You see elementals. The commander card, Xyrus Writhing Storm. You see Xyrus wrapped around a balloon. That's clearly Skysail, and a lot of the cards that depict Skysail show them having monsters. There's one called Valiant Rescuer, which shows basically what I failed to try and describe to you in the past 5 minutes. So Valiant Rescuer is a 1 and a white for a human soldier, 3/1. And the card art depicts a Skysail Defender with a man slung over his shoulders in a fireman's lift running away across a gangplank away from a flying monster. And the flavor text reads, "The floating city of Skysail has 2 rules. Don't leave your crewmates behind, and don't mess with the guardrails." So yeah, you can kind of get from this flavor text alone that Skysail is a much more sort of whimsical and sort of all for one for all kind of place than the sort of sacrifice yourself for your city-state version of Dranath. That's how you can kind of tell.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're not pirates in any way, shape, or form, because they are essentially. I guess they're not pirating each other, which is what makes pirates. I guess it's profession, not the fact you're just a sky ship. I guess.
Yeah,
but I talked myself out of it immediately.
But I know what you mean. Like if you were to see a pirate card in the Skysail Humans of Ikoria, you wouldn't necessarily think it was out of place. But yeah, it's that kind of idea. One last little sort of thing to speak about Skysail, because we don't really spend that much time there, is that they use red crystals on their uniforms. So if you're looking for a Skysail card and you can't quite tell the difference between that human versus any of the others, what crystals do they use? They use red crystals. I don't know if they're more effective than the green ones. They don't mention that at all.
Well, it's like Ralgrin has the pinkish red crystals, so maybe it's just the fact that they could get them from them more easily. Because Rugged Highlands also shows red crystals, Bloodfell Caves also shows red crystals, so it might just be what they had available to them, because obviously they have access to everything.
Yeah, sure. But there we go. So that's Skysail. The Skysail to me feels very Mortal Engines, the kind of second half of that story where they
absolutely
floating structure full of skyships. Cool. The last little human settlement that we need to talk about is Lavabrink in Ralgrin. Lavabrink's the place that in the last episode I spoke about, which is a city formed underneath the cliff overhang of the volcanic coastline on the continent that we're on. So the city is kind of hidden underneath this shelf when the volcanic magma from the volcano above spills over the shelf, creating a lava curtain. And then the people of Lavabrink have used this spilling lava to channel into little canals, which they then use to power industry, to make weapons and armor. It's often said that the people of Lavabrink make the best equipment in Ikoria for fighting monsters and for self-defense. And they're considered by many to be some of the most sort of rugged people on the plane. It's worth noting that in the book, General Kudrow talks about how Dranath is the only city to actively repel monsters, which is kind of part of his whole Dranath is the best shtick. And Skysail doesn't necessarily repel monsters, it kind of just has to deal with them and kind of run away from them. But Lavabrink does have quite an effective defense system. And what Lavabrink does is it doesn't use walls like Dranath. What it does is it uses mages to coerce the lava spilling off of the shelf into a big sort of curtain to protect themselves against monsters trying to invade, and then they kind of part the lava curtain when they need to, which then helps channel it into these canals to power their industry. That kind of touches on something that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is that magic does exist in this world, and humans can use magic as well. I think you mentioned in a previous episode that they don't use it in the same way that, say, Innistrad uses it, where it becomes almost like hard science. It still is arcane magic, but it's used for healing, and it's used for, channeling some of the elements as best they can. It's not their primary line of defense, but you see on card arts there are still people using like counterspell magic and like shield magic and all that kind of thing, which Lavabrink does use. They also seem to have monsters that kind of are part of their like immediate surroundings, whereas in Drannith and Skysail they kind of either actively repel monsters or they have to run away from them. Lavabrink does have this lava curtain, but they also do have to deal with elementals popping out of the lava itself. You see on several of the cards that you still see people within Lavabrink having to sort of dodge around these lava monsters, which is kind of an interesting idea, that they are just in constant danger even within their own sort of territory, which I think is kind of cool. And yeah, there's really not much else that we know about Lavabrink. We actually know the least about it. There's some human cards that are depicted in Lavabrink, but no more than the Skysail or the Drannith cards. You mentioned that they use pinky crystals, which is true on a couple of cards, but then in other cards they have blue crystals as part of their heavy armor.
I think one of the main things we can take from Lavabrink is that if you're up against it all the time, you might get stunted in terms of like industrial improvement, like technological advancements, that kind of thing. You don't have enough time when you're spending all your time being militaristic to have like developments, which is probably why Lavabrink has the best armor and that kind of thing, because their foundries and stuff they can focus on that, whereas Drannith has to focus pretty much entirely on defense, and Skysail has to focus entirely and pretty much on being able to disperse and flee when they need to, whereas I guess Lavabrink can hulker down and actually like work on things like industry, which is quite interesting to think. And it's probably why the best armor and stuff comes from there, because they can actually spend the time to actually, make it properly. Whereas I don't think necessarily in Drannith they have the time to.
No, absolutely.
So that's an interesting thing, because it's probably why they're so stilted and why they rely on magic, and they don't have all these advancements, because they don't really have the opportunity to advance, because they're too stuck kind of either, as you say, defending, running, or hiding. So yeah, it's an interesting way to look at society.
Yeah, it is. I'd be interested as well, because the Lavabrink is found on the coast. I would be interested to see whether they have in future sets. I really hope they come back to Ikoria. I'm not sure if they will, but we'll see. I'd love to know if Lavabrink has any sort of navy or has any kind of seafaring chops to them, because they seem like they would be the society that, being on the coast and having access to magma and molten metals, that would make some kind of big tanker, would kind of go off, and we could see like a big sort of like warship kind of like aesthetic to them. I think that'd be quite cool to go and fight monsters.
The big thing for me, I think, about the coast is that from what we know, the monsters only get bigger into the sea, and it says on the flavor text of Indatha Trium that they were formed by the behemoth Indath, and its final footsteps before vanishing into the sea. So I think there's a good chance that boats don't survive out in the sea very long.
They made a boat once and they never saw it again.
Yeah, because they were like, well, actually, if the biggest thing ever to exist is over there somewhere just chilling, maybe we just stay on the land.
Yeah, potentially. That is that is a very, very good point. I didn't think of that, which is why I have you on this show, Nathan. And that is the only reason. Now,
of course, I'm sure.
it's not your incredible insight into parts of magic that I have no idea about. It's just that. Cool. So that is Lavabrink. We don't really know much about Lavabrink. As I say, it was the one that we spent the least amount of time on. Didn't go there at all in the fucking book, which... I make that sound like I'm pissed off about it. I'm not. It was a 200-page novella that had a very specific story to tell. But we went to Skysail. We spent a lot of time in Drannith. We didn't go anywhere near Lavabrink. So hopefully we see more of that in the future.
Well, this is where Uncharted Realms helped, because you got a little pocket of every part of the plane. And if you wanted a little bit of pocket of everything, it was great. Obviously, if you get a whole story about one part of it, then you kind of get all your eggs in one basket. So.
Yeah, which is it's the same problem that Eldraine had as well with their different courts. We went to everywhere in the book except the red one. I can't even think of what that was.
Don't want to go to the fiery places, do they? They don't really. They're like, we did Chandra last for the core set. We've done it. We've done fire enough. Thanks, bye.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there we go. The last two big factions we're going to talk about are the Hunters and the Bonders. So these are not city dwellers. These two human factions kind of dwell outside cities. Bonders are the big one. So we're going to spend the last section of our episode talking about that. But I do want to touch on the Hunters. So the Hunters are a section of the human society which they're described in the book through the eyes of Draneth people at least as being those who are unfit for military service. Which is a really nice way of saying twats, arseholes, and people who couldn't follow orders.
Also the insane as well. The people that weren't, the ones that were a little bit
sure.
like
Being charitable, also people who suffer with mental illness that, people of Ikoria wouldn't understand and therefore cast them out of their society. So those people as well. So there we go. But yeah, these are all the kind of undesirables. The Hunters, from what we see in the book, so we follow one sort of group of hunters in the book specifically, which are named characters, but there are plenty of cards which show hunters as well. They probably get they're probably the third most represented on the cards behind the Humans of Draneth and the Bonders. And so we do see a lot of them. They are basically bounty hunters for monsters. They hunt for sport. Anything that they can't sell from a monster kill, which is what they do. They're monster killers. Anything they can't sell, they use to craft armor or to use in magic rituals for weaponizing arcane magics. They spend time in the cities. They are allowed in the cities, but they're obviously not necessarily welcome. In the book, General Kudrow uses them as mercenaries to basically do the jobs that he doesn't want the military to be seen doing. So they are effective. They do know what they're doing. And you do get some of the cards do depict hunters which are very clearly specialists in what they do. Visually as well, I know this is an audio podcast and I always talk about the card arts, but the Hunters of Ikoria are spooky fucking people. They look very aggressive and they look very evil.
Goths,
like traditionally
they look like goths.
Yeah, very gothy.
They look like they listen to like Black Sabbath and things like that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I used to wear a lot of black makeup and everything, but yeah, they look gothic as fuck. It's great. Super punky. I think if this was in a slightly different genre, they look quite sort of diesel punk. There's a lot of goggles going on. There's a lot of like heavy helmets. There's a lot of like straps and like big sort of heavy leather sort of materials going around. Some notable cards which shows what I'm kind of talking about. You have Whisper Squad, Titan Hunter, and Cheville, Bane of Monsters, which is the kind of legendary human who's the kind of face of a lot of these hunters. They do work together. They're not completely individualistic, but it's worth noting that these are the most Black Manor-aligned humans on the plane. They are completely for their own gain. Even when they're working together, they aren't like friends. They are just associates. And I know we've spoken a lot about the black-white philosophies of Draneth. It's worth noting that most of the human cards in this set are either black or white, most of them, if they're not the Bonders. And these guys are definitely the blackest of the Black Manor. So yeah, check them out. They are. And there's a specific point a specific point gets made when Jirini's going through that, because hunters sell for profit, like all of their different bits and pieces, whereas Draneth doesn't even consider that. They don't look at monsters as something to be used for profit. So obviously it feels like the hunters are exploiting the monsters. So from our point of view, from what we've seen from the monsters and the humans, like that kind of paints them negatively. Obviously, from their point of view, they are still surviving. From most of their society, they don't see them as badly as we do, because we kind of empathize with the monsters even more than everyone else does. They are essentially like the bad side of it, because it is essentially
which I think
that maliciousness,
which is a really interesting choice, because like we've spoken a lot about how they've tried to tell the story of these humans in a nuanced way, and they've tried not to paint any one sort of section of the human tribes as being outwardly evil. And it's funny that in a set which has a fascistic nationalist state in Draneth and a separatist kind of out for themselves sect in Lavabrink, that the people that we actually despise the most, despite them probably being the most fun in the same way that pirates are fun, is the hunters. Like, they're cruel, they hunt for sport, they are these
they torture.
They torture, exactly.
That's the thing. Everyone's like, oh, be a pirate. Like, pirates aren't like they raped and pillaged.
Like,
it's not good.
No, it's
not.
They are in the book. You do see them almost look perturbed. So the squad of hunters, which Jirina kind of goes on a little adventure with, they come across a dinosaur which they have to take down, and it seems that the hunters are almost about to like torture the dinosaur to death as opposed to just kill it outright. And she has to insist that for time's sake they just kill it and move on, which the hunters seem upset about. So yeah, they definitely are not nice people. fairly self-explanatory, the hunters, even though we did spend 5 minutes explaining them. The last group, and the one that kind of deserves some of the most lip service, are the Bonders of Ikoria. So throughout the story of Ikoria, we come into the main storyline, and Ikoria has pretty much been the way it's been for however long, but it's a fairly sort of settled plane. But just before the events of the book and the events of the set, there's something going on with the crystals on Ikoria that's causing the monsters to mutate, that's causing the monsters to seemingly become more intelligent and becoming more efficient in killing the human population. And there seems to be this phenomenon called bonding, in which humans and monsters are forming some kind of mystical, intrinsic bond between one another that essentially makes them like blood brothers. Like they're psychically, empathically connected, and it basically makes them two halves of a whole. And this process, this bonding, is officially in the kind of lore of Ikoria called the Eluda, which is Eludha. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Eluda?
Yeah, Eluda.
Yeah, and this is what this process is. It seems to have something to do with the crystals on the plane, although like many things with the crystals of Ikoria, we have no real idea. Like, neither do the characters. Like, it's not just us as the readers or the game players. The characters of Ikoria have no fucking clue what the crystals are really about.
Yeah, no one knows what's going on.
No, not really.
The only person who seems to know what's going on is someone who we don't know. And we get no context of who they are or why they were doing it.
Yeah, the mysterious planeswalker that's in the yeah, have no fucking idea.
Yeah, the only person who seems to know what's going on, we find nothing about.
Absolutely.
It's great.
So there we are. The Eluda seems to happen either instantaneously, so at first sight. So, for example, in the book, we see Luca and his soon-to-be bonded cat monster instantly form a connection, even though Luca doesn't want to have it. But we also see in the Planeswalker's Guide to Ikoria that some of these connections take years to sort of adapt to. So we see the example of a card which is Winota, Joiner of Forces. It's the legendary creature card. And Winota, you see in the card art, only has one arm. Her other arm is taken at the elbow. And it seems to be that the monster which she's bonded to was the one that attacked her and took her arm. And then when she was kind of left there sort of die, she regained her sort of consciousness in the wild and eventually bonded to that same creature. It's worth noting that this Eluda kind of happens to anyone. So there are lots of depictions on the card art, and indeed the story revolves around Luca, who is a Tranith soldier, being bonded to a monster. And so it's again, it's not always something that happens with like want or intent. Sometimes it just happens. Most of the cities in Ikoria see this bonding as being unwanted. So bonders aren't necessarily allowed in any of the city states, and in Tranith it's actively punishable by death, it seems, this Eluda. Yeah. But it also seems that a lot of the bonders lead quite a nomadic lifestyle. A lot of the humans that we find in Ikoria might not actually belong to any individual city-state, and so this bonding with the monsters is actually beneficial to them. A lot of the bonders that we meet in the book seem to be almost confused as to how city life functions. So there is this kind of nomadic, one with nature, out living with the beasts, kind of Garrick Wild speaker feel to a lot of the bonders, I think.
Yeah, I like. It's a really nice. I like the. It's the dichotomy of the story that we seem to find in the book shows it almost as if there's a Bonders being weird, whereas what we see from the cards and what we see from the Bonders point of view is that the Drannith is actually like the weird part of the plane, and it's almost like the future is in this bonding, this cohabitation, this way of living together rather than living in like separately. So that's I think that's why it'd be a real shame to not go back there, because I think in terms of story points, it's really interesting to see the humans at a development process where we've seen both sides, and we've seen a normal typical fantasy story where you're up against all the monsters. Not like Innistrad, there was no dichotomy of whether or not the demons were maybe trying to be helpful. Like, it was bad versus good.
Yeah.
And what we've seen plenty of other places where you work already in cohesion, and like, say, for example, like at Lorwyn, where everything kind of lives in harmony, nothing really cares whether it's a different species or not. Whereas now we're kind of hitting right in the middle of a story of going from, oh, it's not normal to, oh, it's absolutely normal. And if anything, it's probably going to be the normal thing going forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that is really interesting about Bonders, visually speaking, is we have all these different uniforms for the different sort of city inhabitants of humans. And we obviously have the hunters who have a very striking aesthetic. Mostly, as I said, the humans of Ikoria are in the Mardu colours, but the Bonders are in all different colours. So it doesn't matter what colour of mana you're looking at, you'll find humans in this set that are in that kind of manner. And they're not always bonded, as we've seen in the commander sets, to monsters that share their color or even have necessarily an enemy color. So the companion cards in the commander sets, as we've spoken about in one of our previous episodes, you get a 2-color monster and a monocolor human. And in the cards in the main set, you see this kind of idea as well. Some of the humans are multicolored, some of them are monocolored, and the creatures are clearly of different sort of colors as well. The uniform that they wear, because I would call it a uniform, I suppose, the way that Bonders kind of signify themselves is that they seem to dress in garbs that are emulating what their monster looks like. So you can see this in cards like Slippery Bog Bonder. So it's a Bonder and a Slippery Bogle, which is amazing. Bogles are on Ikoria, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's a really, really good throwback. I really like it.
Yeah, and the Bonder, the human, is wearing an outfit that makes them look like a giant bogle, even down to the details of having little pendants coming off of the armor that look like the sort of mucus which the bogles produce, which is really cool. You see another one as well, Fight as One, which is a sorcery spell, which shows a giant cat with horns, with zebra sort of stripings, and then a human next to it with a big headdress that has big horns on it, and he's wearing a white outfit with zebra striping, which is really cool. Something to note as well on that card, that card definitely looks like it inspired the character of Zeph and Barrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I'm really glad we see them as a card as well, because they seemed really, really cool. Like when I was reading about them, I looked into the set. I was like, oh, we do get to see them, and they do look really cool.
They do look really cool, which again is a whole other discussion as to why more characters can't cross over between the two things, but there we go. And there we are. So, I mean, that's pretty much the Bonders. One last little weird thing about the Bonders. I'm sure I've forgotten other things as well, but the monsters specifically seem to be able to communicate between each other through the crystals of Ikoria. Which I find really interesting. Like, well, this is what language.
This is what I think is that. Right, so what I imagine the crystals are, and this is kind of, so you just said that what I imagine it is almost like universal translators, because what they need to have asked the question we didn't actually get answered to is whether they could always do this, because if humans are suddenly now be able to communicate between monsters and themselves, and they specifically say that all monsters, as much as they do have clades, have individualistic mutations and permutations, so they shouldn't necessarily have species identities between them. That if they're able to talk to each other, and then now humans and monsters be able to talk to each other, maybe the crystals are just one giant telephone communications device, and it's allowing and it's all kind of sparking at the same kind of time. Because I don't know if we knew that the monsters could talk to each other before we knew that Bonders could happen. That's something that's never answered. So I think this has maybe all happened at the same kind of time. And it's just that some humans, because they're resilient and they're against monsters, whereas most monsters live side by side more comfortably, that it's only now that we're seeing the interaction and we're getting bonding, because typically humans and monsters would be at odds against each other. Yeah. So I think, it's got to be to do with all the crystals. Like, it has to be. Right? There's no way it's not.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'd be interested to see where this set goes. So by the end of the book, The Sundered Bond, Bonders and their monsters are after defending against Luca and his army of monsters, which he's made through bonding with multiple creatures. Oh, that is one last little point as well. You can seem to bond with multiple creatures if you're talented enough. So there's one legendary creature, Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, who seems to be bonded on the card art with more than one monster. So this does seem to be possible, so it's not just a one-on-one link, which kind of undermines the whole thing.
We don't know the extent of it, do we? Like, we don't know necessarily if you'll ever see, like, say, two monsters that are, say, a pair. Would you bond with both of them? That kind of thing. Like, we don't know really. We haven't seen enough of it to tell.
By the end of the story, that point kind of backs up that Luca is able, through the power of the Ozolith, to basically create an army of monsters at his disposal, because he's kind of bonded to all of them, or he's having authority over them through the Eluder. And an army of Bonders with Jirana and the people of Dranith are fighting against him. By the end of this sort of narrative, the Bonders are finally allowed within the city walls of Dranith for, whatever purposes they want to have. Which is kind of an interesting sort of development. And it kind of shows that if we were to come back to this plane, maybe we understand what Bonders are a bit more, or maybe bonding will be something completely different. Maybe
we see it integrated more.
Yeah. Like a plane where humans and monsters, like, their society is completely joined together. So we get a real evolution of the plane, which would be a really interesting idea. And that's kind of it for the humans on Ikoria. I mean, I've had a lot to say about them, and I know you found them interesting as well. On paper, they seem to be definitely the sort of the second thought behind the monsters. But I kind of felt like the monsters, whilst their lore was interesting in terms of the facts of what they were, like they're all unique, they all fall into these 5 different things, but they all can mutate and blah blah blah. Because they're so random and because they're so infinite, it's almost like there's less to say about them. Whereas
the cards are interesting, but the lore is boring. Whereas with humans, the cards might be a bit more boring, but the lore is way more nuanced.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I kind of wanted to do this episode. I mean, that is the lore of Ikoria. We've done 2 whole episodes on it, and we've spoken about it during almost 3 other episodes talking about the cards. I mean, like this plane. Now that we've seen it, we've yet to get the cardboard in our hands, but now that we've read the book and there is so much to say about it already. There are so many opinions about so many different types of card. Like every single day I see a different thread about either whether it's mutate or companion. There's just some very hot-headed opinion and take, and it's getting people talking. It's really annoying. It's in the same way that Theros was the worst set not to give us a story for. Like, this is one of the worst sets not to get me to be able to get my hands up immediately and play it. Because I did one draft on Arena, and oh my god, this set is bonkers fun. It's really, really, really good. So yeah, it's really frustrating that we can't get out and play it, obviously, because of all the current circumstances. Sure. I mean, lore speaking, how does this plane stack up against the sort of recent planes that we've been to? We went to a new plane not too long ago in Eldraine. We went to Theros. Before that, we kind of capped off Ravnica, and there's been lots of changes going around the multiverse. Like, how's Ikoria working out for you as a brand new plane with a storyline? Like, how do you feel about it?
I think it's really good. I think it's given us a new way of doing wedges in a world where we don't really necessarily want to go back to Tarkir. So I like this idea of triumphs and the 5 different like the different parts of the society. But also, the thing that I clearly like is that I love this transitional period we found ourselves in the story. We've seen a really interesting idea mechanically for the cards, all this mutate nonsense that you can do. Great. Mechanically, that's really interesting. But we've also fallen into the middle of a massive, like almost worldwide change and development, going from the normal status quo of monsters versus humans to a situation where we have no idea what is causing it, but there is massive developments happening, and it's deliberately enforced. We don't know what happens now that the Ozolith is destroyed, and that there are so many little questions that we kind of want answered. And Theros didn't really give me any questions that I was like, oh, actually, let's go back and find out. I don't really care. I'm not gonna lie. I've forgotten about Theros. Whereas there are so many things that have come off the back of this that I'm like, oh, but I kind of want to know a little bit more. Like the fact that we had all 5 like these massive mythical apex predators, we found out nothing about them. I'm not annoyed about that. I want to come back. I want to see more.
I think this plane, maybe more so than Eldraine. And Eldraine had a really established lore setup because they obviously pulled on fairy tale and Arthurian lore, whereas this was almost, I mean, every plane has some sort of basis in Earth mythology, because that's how we as humans tell stories. And again, magic is a storytelling device. But there's so much left to be explored on Ikoria, because they made the decision to tell quite a focused story, which was a smart decision in the short term. But in the long term, now I want to come back to this plane. I'm worried that they won't, because it's such a high concept plane that I don't think it's broad enough to be a fan favorite. A lot of people really don't care or don't like the kaiju feel or the kind of manga anime depiction of human societies. They just kind of think, okay, it's the kaiju set, whatever. I hope they do.
I can see where they're coming from.
There's a lot left to say.
Yeah, because it can feel very much like that Attack on Titan analog, where you're like, oh, it's being so overdone at the moment. And I can see why things like certain mechanics might rub people up the wrong way. But what I think as well is that it's realistic. They wanted to try something big and splashy, and it's very thematic. Considering we're going back to Zendikar, realistically, if they do old set, new set, and they alternate like that, old sets you can go back and live the sets that work and do them in kind of more innovative ways. But on the new planes and the new sets, places that you don't have to go back to if they didn't work, you want to try these big splashy effects. The problem is, as you say, if we don't go back because they receive negative feedback and they don't think it's worth it, then we've lost a real big potential story. Little things like, why the hell was Narset on the plane?
Yeah, we haven't even spoken about the Planeswalkers yet.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, so yeah, considering how much we have to talk about, how many episodes did we do on Theros? Really? Like, not that much.
One big one.
We've got so much to say.
Yeah. I mean, that is something where we can talk about in the future. We can talk about Luca's story, Vivian's story, and Narset's inverted commas story.
I think this idea of the bigger arc. I did my inverted commas for the air quote. The bigger arc that we've seen at the beginning in Eldraine and probably this set, we will know more in retrospect in a couple of years where they started, what beats we were supposed to pay attention to, where we saw the beginnings of. So yeah. Yeah, it'd be good to look back
I think, in Luca, we haven't spoken much about the Planeswalkers because I think that probably warrants its own episode at some point. Maybe not now, but
at some point, yeah, for sure.
Luca, I think, is a very nuanced Planeswalker character, and I think is a bit of a gift to us. Whereas the Kenrith twins are fantastically written characters, I'm not necessarily that invested in their story.
Yeah, rich kids, fantastic, great, good.
Whereas as Luca, as an outcast of Dranith, that went megalomaniac like mad, tried to take over a plane with an army of monsters, which he hated because he hates monsters, and now has the power to control monsters across the multiverse.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
That's a really interesting space to go.
This is a supervillain origin, like back in
which is not where I thought they would take it. I honestly thought they were going to have Vivian, because Vivian is very much an anti-hero, and I really thought they might have lent into. I didn't think this would be a villain story for Vivian, but I definitely thought that she would be the kind of the thing to shake up the plane, like her presence would shake up. Whereas it didn't at all. She was there very much as a kind of observer with her own agenda.
Yeah. She was accepted into the story very easily. Like her I'm a Planeswalker bit. It didn't shake anything up. It didn't break anyone's worldviews or anything. Even a few people said, "Oh, we've had ideas about other." I think they're slowly but surely layering this into their stories set by set. Anyway, this idea of people aren't so crazy. Oh my god, we're going to break the world order.
Yeah. Whereas
she's very much accepted. Whereas Lucas,
Lucas started off as the protagonist of the story and ended up as the antagonist. Maybe a little bit rushed in the book itself, but I think the arc it was trying to tell was a very good arc, and left us with Jarina Kudrow, who, as a commander character on the cardboard, is now a central character in the story. So it's kind of done a little flip around. Whereas usually we get story characters that we want to see a card for. This time we've had a card which did really well in the story, so it's kind of a bit of a flip round.
Luca on the Daenerys scale was probably about 7 out of 10.
He is Daenerys Targaryen. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, he is just completely with the flying animal that can attack things as well. Jesus, they just went Game of Titan.
Yeah,
there we go, done.
Game of Titan Brotherhood. Engine.
Attack on
Thrones. So there we go. Any last thoughts on Ikoria? Or no. Apart from I'm looking forward to playing some cards with it. I think the biggest thing from this set is that the art style on it is so good. They did really well on making everything look really pretty from my point of view. But yeah, that's it. That's my final point. Pretty set. Claps. I agree. Claps all around. So, guys, this is actually our 20th episode, which I think is a little bit of a milestone. Fifth of a century. That's a thing, isn't it? I'm making it a thing. What we will be doing, guys, if you want to support this channel, support this podcast, we don't have a Patreon. I'm not setting up a Patreon nowadays because people need their money, and we don't need your money to keep doing this in the way that we've set it up. So we're not doing a Patreon. What I do want to do, though, guys, is get basically more discourse going with you. So I do want you, if you are listening to this and you do have Twitter, please go to the Twitter. It's at mtflavouring. Do hit that follow button. What I want to know from you specifically is I want you to at us about what your most flavorful Ikoria cards are. The card gallery's been out for long enough now. We've talked through the story. We've all read the books. What individual card, one card, is your most flavorful bit of Magic cardboard from this set? Let me know on Twitter. Hit that follow button, shout at us, talk with us, cry and laugh with us, whatever you want to do. And then when we get all the submissions over the next few weeks, we'll do a Twitter poll where we have the top submitted answers, and we'll find out officially, essentially, what our listeners' top-rated flavor card is. And we'll post all that up on the Twitter. But if you don't follow us on the Twitter, you won't know what the fuck's going on. And then you're left out the story. And you'll be all alone, with no friends, and we'll be sat here laughing with all of our friends. So, yeah. Does that motivate you? Does that incentivize you? It should.
Yeah, absolutely. I just like listening to you guys. It's great.
What I always start doing is I always start going, "Hey guys, we're in this together," and then
you end off being like, "Yeah, well, if you don't, fuck you. We don't care. We don't need you."
I mean, that's pretty much how I deal with everyone in my life. So there we go.
You start nice, and by the end of it, you're like, "Don't get detached. Cast them off. Cast them off. Make it your choice.
I don't need you and your validation.
It's my choice."
If you would rather email us than go on the Twitter, guys, so you don't have to admit to people that you listen to this podcast, is you can send emails to mtflavouring@gmail.com. My personal Twitter, I'm going to regret giving it out now, is at AndyManface. Nathan, you can be found at
the Fox and the Moon.
At the Fox and the Moon. You've recently also updated your entire suite of commander decks onto tappedout.com.
Yeah, it doesn't paint a very pretty picture of my playstyle.
What do you mean?
Well, as in I was looking through, and like I mentioned this to you yesterday, where I'm kind of like, because I've been playing for a long time. I bought a lot of the decks as they came out year by year, and without realizing in a kitchen environment, now I play them out in the wild. I have a Prosh deck, you know, I have a Nakusa deck, I have a Breya deck, I have all the decks, and I have a Merrin deck. I have all the decks that no one likes playing against. You know,
you have a
I have some quirky ones, but my fleet is not nice.
Your fleet reads, on paper, objectively speaking, now that you've seen it as a list, your fleet reads as the who's who of commanders that people are done playing against. I think is that fair to say? A lot of them,
for the most part, 70%. The other 30%.
You do have some quirky includes, like your green elf ball deck is a Marwyn deck, which I think is very cool. You've got a Kenrith Twins deck, the partner Planeswalkers, which I haven't seen anyone else do. But yeah, it's always good to get a objective sort of perspective.
And now it allows me to have some flexibility to change some stuff about, because I have nothing better to do.
So if you want to check out our EDH decks, guys, and our lists, then hit us up on Twitter and we'll send you links to our tapped outs. I believe they're also in the show notes for the Grenzo and Scarab God episode if you want to listen.
Indeed.
If you want to listen back to any other Ikoria stuff, guys, if you have missed it, because we've actually pumped out quite a few episodes recently, it's easy to miss them. We did do several episodes on Ikoria, so go back and listen to those. Listen to some of our earlier episodes as well. Our flow and the kind of tech that we used for them wasn't quite as slick as it is now. I mean, I say that. We're obviously at our worst tech because we're doing this remotely. But I think, they're less polished in a way. But there is a lot of good information, especially in our Colour Pie series, so check it out. Other than that, guys, if you want to message us with anything else, if you just want to send some love, then we welcome it all. For the most part, and as always, we have magic the flavouring.
See you soon.